Reema, hello and welcome to ThePrint.
Hello, it's good to be here.
So we are doing this as part of Mind Over Matter, which is a product we do every week on mental health. So since your book has come out, tell us actually first a bit about your book and about the journey of writing that book.
Okay, so the journey of writing my book, it's called Unparenting, Sharing Awkward Truths with Curious Kids, was, if I am to describe it in one word, painful because I have lived through all of that. And with the pandemic, the writing of the book stopped
Hmm.
because I had to really redefine how I saw myself as a parent, also my relationship with my child, because the entire world had sort of changed.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it was difficult in bits and pieces, but also interesting in the sense that it led to my expansion a lot. The book is mostly personal, I think 90% personal, if one can put a percentage to things like that, but also a lot comes from my own childhood, my work, which is in the field of mental health, and um, it's sort of sharing this perspective on parenting where things don't have to be followed in a very traditional strict disciplinarian way, where parenting is not about ordering or fitting your child into a certain kind of box in terms of how they behave towards you, but creating this kind of warmth and openness where the difficult and awkward aspects of life, when they're growing up and they're reaching puberty and they're exploring their sexuality, their body. They're also confronting things like bullying and abuse in the larger world. And with the framework of families changing, so many families are changing from two parent families to single parent families to queer families. So, how do kids then talk about these things with parents if we shut them off, which is what traditional parenting is a lot about? There
Hmm.
are benefits to traditional parenting also. So, the book is not about saying this is right or this is wrong, but in this changed world and environment where we are so closed and isolated, how can I create more closeness and warmth where my kids feel okay asking me anything about anything?
Hmm.
And how do I work on myself to be ready for that? Because so much of this is about us as parents and as people, because we've been brought up a certain way. So it's everything in that sense, unconditioning yourself, unparenting yourself begins from your own childhood onwards. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what it's about.
So the word "un" that there's a lot of times the kind of lingo that we've developed around mental health. Let's say over the past, I'll call it a decade, but I think it has been sort of accelerated because of COVID when we realized that it's not just the body that the pandemic was sort of
Yeah,
affecting. It was or most of it was actually in our heads because we were suddenly closed up and we
yeah,
were forced to actually sometimes often for a lot of it was forced to be with your family when
yeah,
you didn't have a plan or didn't prep yourself mentally to be with.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then conflicts have come up,
yeah,
especially with children and all of that, I think. So I
yeah.
want to know how important it is. And you just mentioned, right, that unparenting, in a sense, is also unlearning the things that you've grown up learning as a child from your parents and
Yeah,
then taken them up as a parent, right?
yeah,
So how
yeah.
important is unlearning generally and also particularly when it comes to mental health?
I think the one danger of staying static, which is the opposite of undoing anything, is that you typify yourself. You hold on very tightly to labels of all sorts. Since we're talking about parenting, for example, if I take myself too seriously as a mother, as a
Mm.
parent, then everything I do and say is perfect, is right. My
Right.
standards up there and my child is somewhere down there.
Mm.
There is power that builds into this dynamic where warmth is lost, closeness is lost. Oftentimes, that kind of to and fro of learning that happens in all kinds of relationships is lost. So, the un of everything is actually learning to hold these labels which come with generations of training that a father is supposed to be like this, a mother is supposed to be like this, a man is supposed to be like this, a woman is supposed to be like this, which all of it has had its advantages, yes, in the way we've lived our roles. But as the world is changing so rapidly around us, with structures changing so rapidly around us, we ourselves are not catching up really, which is where all the conflict emerges now. Yeah. So, in that sense, I think unlearning is not discarding of old traditions, but it is acknowledging this has worked for us and it has worked for us well, but this isn't really working. How can I find a third way of being, which incorporates sort of both? So it's not dismissing everything that's old, because that's not really necessary, but it's looking at my particular situation, my particular sort of framework of being, and then within this framework, what suits me. When you talk about mental health in this respect, a lot of the undoing of our perception around mental health has to be to finally acknowledge that problems exist. We cannot brush them under the carpet, which is what the very traditional Indian cultural milieu has been. We're all perfect. We don't have families. Don't question families. Families can never be toxic. We do this because we love you.
Hmm.
Yeah. Or this you're supposed to do this because XYZ, because you're supposed to be, obedient, and obedience is good, and obedience is maybe good but not always good, because there's also some damage to the self that happens. So
Right.
questioning those paradigms, in that sense, what is not working for us. What is very, very clear post pandemic is that there are fractures and fissures in families which we haven't addressed in the longest time. Because why else are kids not okay at home? Why
Hmm.
else are kids seeking things outside of the home? If
Right.
the house and the family is not safe and not welcome, of course we'll go outside and seek for that warmth and community somewhere else. And
Hmm.
that is creating its own problems, where you are completely dissociated from your physical space. And the people that you are in close proximity to, and you have this alternative sort of existence somewhere else, which is not wrong. But then this box of our lives is completely empty, and we're struggling to relate to each other as family members. And how can we bring in some flexibility where this is also a welcome space? The family is welcome, the home is welcome, and children don't feel so threatened so much. So I think in that sense, understanding mental health issues, especially as kids are changing so much more, because media is everywhere, they're growing at a more rapid pace, they are more outwardly very, very quickly, whereas kids would step out into the world at 18, 19. They're stepping out into the world at 10 and 11 because they're connected to the world through media. They're
Hmm.
already looking out. So how do you prepare them for this change? You cannot prepare them unless you yourself are prepared to question some of your assumptions about what's right, what's wrong, what's healthy, what's not healthy. So the in that sense is not taking yourself so seriously as a parent that you forget to learn, and
Hmm.
you forget to unlearn, and you forget to question your own self. And then that questioning, you take it to other areas, and you become a more hospitable space for your child in that process,
Hmm.
where then their health has better chances of thriving, where they're not as isolated in the family.
Hmm. So, in one of your chapters, actually, you in fact talk in detail about this, like, and you also share about how you mention your own experience with your child, and you talk about when you come into the house and there's an immediate complaint, and there's a tendency to react, probably not so much respond, and then how one of the strategies that you've used is that you'll first spend some time with your child and then come back to these so-called complaints that, let's say, your mother had about how his behavior was.
Yeah,
And then you also shared a point about how sometimes when there's a lot of tension already in a particular situation, there's a lot of, let's say, name calling or screaming or
yeah,
anger already. The tendency is more to react rather than respond. And then, taking a pause
yeah,
usually
yeah,
helps, because then you're, responding to what has happened as opposed to, oh, I have to, say something because I'm a parent. So could you tell us more about these things that you've also learned as a parent? I think it'd be really helpful.
yeah. So it's so interesting you've picked on these two incidents from the book, because both of them are connected to the same thing in a sense.
Hmm.
If you feel like you're not good enough as a human being, as a parent, anything that some people say to you as way of feedback will feel like hurt inside. So when someone's giving you a complaint, as soon as you enter, it's their way of providing feedback. It may not be very constructive. It's kind of negative, and it could have waited, but it's still feedback. Oh, this happened. But if you perceive feedback as an attack, as a judgment all the time, there's no way that you can't react, because you will be on the defensive. You will be, protecting yourself from these onslaughts. And when we are defending, we're not really looking at whoever else is present. In these instances, the child as
Hmm.
part of yourself. He or she also becomes the enemy that you have to defend yourself from, you see. So, in that sense, this is very closely related to how I feel about myself, which is, health, if you can call it mental health or you can call it health. But so I sort of stumbled on these things as, my role as a mother became more and more vocal, in that sense, where more exchange started happening. When children are small, when they're babies, there's hardly any exchange in that sense. There's only caretaking, and you make sure that they're safe and you keep them alive. But as they grow older, they begin to touch upon these, sore points in yourself which you didn't even know existed. My biggest learning has been that this journey of this close relationship, this very intimate relationship, and this also applies to romantic relationships because they're also so close. These relationships with partners and with children are maybe the second time you're coming in such close contact with human beings after your parents. So all of the wounds from that time, which have led to you feeling a certain way about yourself, will all erupt in these close relationships, be it with partners and be it with children. And that is the moment for us to pay attention to where is this coming from. And in most cases, it's coming from a time that is no longer present, but we continue to keep acting from the past. And that's the problem. We're not present anymore. We're not listening to what the child's saying or what he or she needs. We're acting from our old hurt, our old wounds, our old insecurities, and that just messes everything up. You're then carrying forward everything that you've held on to so long. All of your baggage, you're just passing it on to your children.
Right. I was actually reading an article of yours somewhere else
Yeah.
before this interview, and you were actually talking about your struggle with COVID and your struggle about, when you were trying to finish the book and how, you had to be separated obviously from your child to keep him safe, and you weren't able to provide anything, no solace, no comfort. And then there's this part where you mentioned about humor actually, and you call it morbid humor. I actually wanted to come back because I feel like within the Indian parents and children dynamic, I don't think we rely on humor much. There's always authority. There is other things. But there's this lack of humor in the interactions because maybe we feel like humor sort of trivializes certain things, or maybe trivializes or challenges the authority of it. And there are all instances. I remember when being scolded, sometimes you feel like laughing a lot. You're scolded for something really bad. Your urge is to laugh, right? If you do, it can go two ways. Either your parent also bursts out laughing because, of the situation. Or obviously, you probably will get a tight slap.
How dare you? How dare you laugh at me?
I wanted you had to say anything about this element because I found it interesting.
I think humor is life-saving. It's relationship-saving. You can apply it to any place in your life, except for maybe in situations where you don't need it. And again, that connects back to that not taking yourself so seriously as a parent. That if I am a parent, I know everything about everything. How dare you question me? And that is where all of that, not giving into jokes, not teasing each other, not, being funny around kids come from, because you're just so stuck in your head. I know everything. I'm the parent. I have to do it this way, and this is the right way, and that is the wrong way. This right and wrong is the basis of so much misery in families and in our relationship with children, because we just stop sitting down to their level and looking at them in the eyes. We're acting from a place that's very high above. And of course, anyone who's high above, how can they resort to humor? It makes them ridiculous, isn't it? But in my experience, the one thing that has guaranteed closeness with my child is humor. If I indulge his jokes, his poop jokes, his fart jokes, which is something I say in the book also, that if you indulge the small things, they will come to you with the big things. But if you frighten them with the small things, how dare you this, how dare you that, they're never going to come and tell you the big stuff. So you've left them alone if you've taken yourself too seriously. Of course, there's a balance, there's a flexibility that you need. You need to also be serious at certain times. There need to be boundaries. If I am, funny with my kid, doesn't mean that he can badmouth me or misbehave with me. There are ways to do that without being scary, without being like this authoritarian figure. You can do that as human beings, with bringing in a sense of compassion for each other. So.
I'll come back to something that I think a lot of, so I have a sister who also has a child and she's also a teacher. So I remember one of the conversations we've had is where she's talking about how this exposure to technology, which you also mentioned, that there is right now a massive exposure to technology. Even if you limit the hours that somebody is on social media, you'll still have to acknowledge that it was not the way, it was not the same way when we were growing up. that your access to certain things, and more prominently probably sex education, sorry, was very, the sources, good or bad, were very limited as opposed to
Very good.
now.
Yeah.
And there is obviously an over sexualization even of children right now at this
Yeah.
time. So, and you have obviously talked about it in your book. So I wanted you to sort of share more about it. How does one navigate that now? Because it's very, very, it's more challenging than obviously older times when
It's overwhelming, it's overbearing, and I'm so glad you put this out, because there is a lot of time a tendency for parents to say hamara zamana bahut acha tha, that our time was this blissful time. Yes, it was in many way, but the over availability of things and the way the neighborhood has suddenly become the world is
Hmm.
very challenging for children. We have no clue how challenging it is. We just have to go back to our own childhoods and imagine our interaction in a day was limited to maybe a few people. There would be those neighborhood friends or maybe classmates, but these kids, suddenly these kids are just connected to the whole world. And when they'd be exposed to the opinions, the judgments or perspectives, or maybe they're only their close family and maybe school teachers, now it's just so much to look at, so much to navigate, so much to choose from, so much to limit yourself from. There's this constant negotiation that they're forced to do. How much screen time, how much can I play, how much can I, do this gadget, how much can I do that gadget. We didn't have to do any of that negotiation. So in that sense, their lives are harder than ours, although they look more comfortable physically. But emotionally, mentally, neurologically, which is where the weight of all this is, your nervous system is constantly overweight because there is so much input.
Hmm.
And you do not know how to balance all this. You do not know how to regulate yourself so much. And it's very tricky. One thing I have begun to accept is that there is only so much control that you can do, because
Hmm.
it's all pervasive, it's everywhere. पहले schools में नहीं था, but now even schools have become tech enabled. How much will you protect them from what? So the
Hmm.
first thing is to realistically look at this is, okay, what battles can I fight? Maybe I can do bedtime more strictly. Maybe I can do parental control on devices where you know what apps your child is using. So you're not snooping, but there can be no app authorized into the kid's phone or tablet without your authorization. Yeah. So in those ways, you can sort of navigate. Okay, if a child who's 10 doesn't use the Google that's for everybody, uses like the Kindle or something like that,
Hmm.
and what kind of things can you download, what kind of videos you can watch. So if there's parental guidance or parental control into those devices, those things become limited. That's the first thing. The second is you be prepared or prepare yourself for everything. You have to stay a little abreast, not all, because we can't do that. You can't be everywhere all at once, but at least be a little aware of what are they watching, what shows are they interested in, what kind of music are they interested in, and talk about it. Bring in things conversationally, which I have in my book called Teaching Windows, where
Hmm.
if you know that your kid is, for example, for me, when I knew that my kid was watching sex education, it's not like I can tell him, oh, you shouldn't watch this. I said, okay, let's watch this together. Make time for things like that so you can have conversations around things like that. And I think that's the most we can do as parents when we're just inundated by so much, to prepare ourselves well, to inform ourselves, to have conversations about media safety, to actually tell kids that virtual is not separate from real. It just isn't separate anymore. It's everywhere. So the same way that we teach our kids to cross the road, or which neighbors do you go to, which you don't go to, who are safe people, who are not safe people, what signs to look out for, all of those conversations need to apply to the virtual world also. To not give gadgets into their hands till you have some negotiation, some navigation available. And once they have them, to constantly, sort of keep an eye also till they're older, until okay, now he or she can handle that, because that handling is a task. We can't do it. We find it hard to manage screen time, right? We find it hard to switch on the D&D at 10 p.m. and yet we expect miracles of our children. So content, also being realistic, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, this is the way the world's moving, really. So, but how do you navigate this space?
Hmm. So this is my last question. Since you've spoken of all of this, and you've also said that there has to be this idea that you have to let go, that that we have to be like always there, some sort of like an overlord figure almost, that we should be in the know of everything, or that I have to be right all the time. So how important do you think is forgiveness in parenting, and forgiving yourself is? And forget about the child for a bit. Let's come back to the parent itself. How important is forgiving yourself when you, let's say, mess up?
I think it's immensely important. It's huge because if we do not give ourselves permission to forgive ourselves, we cannot begin again. If you do not forgive, you're stuck in that same old place. And if you don't forgive, then you're also losing out on opportunities to expand, to do better, to be better. And I think children, they are just so kind. They are so compassionate that if you ask for forgiveness, they forgive you more quickly than you forgive yourself. And that's beautiful. I think that really strengthens the bond between, a parent and a child. If you've messed up, if you screamed unnecessarily, or if you've hit your child, if you've done something that you shouldn't have done, you become more human in their eyes if you ask for forgiveness. And I think that's like the first step. And the internal forgiveness is a process. It's like a continuous process which keeps going on. And part of forgiveness is realizing that everything that we know also comes from a certain time and place, and it was outside of us. We did not have total control on it. The way we were parented, we didn't have control on that. Our social and cultural context, we didn't have control on that. But all of that seeps into how we behave as human beings and as parents. So understanding your limitation as a human being, that there is this much you can do, and in this much, even if it's small, there's immense beauty that you can bring in. But other than that, the world is such a large place. How much can you really control? And with that understanding, I think forgiveness becomes easier. Forgiveness of the self, forgiveness of your child, forgiveness of your partners, and also revising that sort of concept, telling yourself about the temporality of all of this, that these are phases, and you can't always be present for your child. You won't be. Our job is maximum, to keep them healthy, to keep them safe, to keep them fed till the time they're with us. But after that, just the way that we were looked after by many people, or we were offered help and often challenges and difficulties, the same is going to happen to our children, and we have no control over that. And we can begin to sort of internalize this when they're very young, or even before, when you decide to have children. If you approach parenting, in my perspective, with the thought that I am not everything, you automatically become soft and gentle because you're not everything. And then you are more open to learning, you're more open to growth, you're more open to laughter because you are not everything. You're just one thing in their lives.
Thank you. This has been, I think, wonderful in so many ways.
For me also, because you took the time and effort to really come with so much preparedness. Thank you for that.